feeling overwhelmed and fatigued, there are two ways to approach that. First is the kind of foundation of fatigue, which is almost always poor sleep and scheduling of sleep. This is something that doesn't get discussed a lot.
The insightful teachings of Andrew Huberman, meticulously presented in this video, delve deep into the fundamental causes of anxiety. He convincingly argues that anxiety primarily arises from a deep-rooted uncertainty about the future, which subsequently manifests in a gaping divide between our expectations and our reality. So intriguingly, this divide can be likened to the concept of laziness, where individuals actively seek to evade discomfort rather than face the necessary exertion.
What is it that they're missing out when it comes to how fear fits into those two as drivers, for good or for worse?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We don't often think about motivation and fear as in the same breath or the same sentence. We are accustomed to thinking about the fact that when we're afraid of something, we can freeze up. But really, motivation and fear are in the same pathway.
In essence, every time that we retreat from challenges, we kind of inadvertently nourish our anxiety, make it stronger. The silver lining, however, is that by understanding this intricate correlation, we discover the key to unlocking the door that leads to mental liberation. We know what to do about it, basically. In this enlightening video, Andrew Huberman takes viewers on an explorative journey into the depths of anxiety and its origins. He proposes an intriguing comparison, equating anxiety to laziness, both of which are driven by innate aversion to mental or physical effort.
And believe it or not, they're in the same chemical pathway. So the only way to talk about motivation is to talk about the molecule dopamine. Dopamine is known for its feel-good properties. We think, a dopamine hit, or, it feels so good, a rush of dopamine. But dopamine's main role in the brain and body is craving, motivation, and pursuit. Okay. And in the absence of dopamine, we don't feel motivated. I'll describe in a moment a classic experiment that illustrates this beautifully. But dopamine's main role is to make us feel motivated and to crave things. Okay. And the interesting thing is that dopamine is the chemical, it's the molecule from which another molecule is made called epinephrine. And epinephrine has another name, which is adrenaline. So to untangle all that, basically, craving and desire is the foundation of stress and fear.
Our nervous system, designed for survival, instinctively anticipates future threats. Consequently, when we choose a path of avoidance akin to laziness, it perpetuates the unending cycle of anxiety. The good news is that by recognizing this pattern, we can, stop the pattern. We can shatter these self-imposed shackles, freeing ourselves from a life hindered by anxiety. In this captivating video, Andrew Huberman draws a fascinating parallel between anxiety and laziness. Both are seemingly born out of a shared desire to dodge discomfort. This fear of exertion feeds directly into our anxiety.
And people think, how could that possibly be? Well, stress and fear comes from adrenaline. So the way to think about this in a kind of real world context is that when we are afraid of something, we have one of three responses. We can either remain still, we can retreat, or we can move forward. All three of those require some increase in our level of activation. And the molecule adrenaline, also called epinephrine, I probably will use those interchangeably, so it really doesn't matter, adrenaline, epinephrine. That is what's responsible for getting us moving. It's also responsible for our sense of fear and paralysis in fear. So if people are feeling that they're not motivated or as motivated as they would like to be, there's a key step that people need to take, which is to start focusing on the craving aspect and dopamine. Because if you can make enough dopamine, you can motivate, you can actually crave moving through challenge. So we can talk about how to do that. But just to underscore how powerful this relationship is between motivation and dopamine.
Fostering an environment of constant apprehension. But here's the twist. Our understanding of this connection signifies the first step towards liberation. By consciously confronting our lazy tendencies, we initiate the process of dismantling our anxiety. This proactive approach enables us to take a step into the world of possibilities, thus facilitating the creation of a more fulfilling and just a better life. something we're more happy to have lived, which I think we all kind of want. Andrew Huberman presents a thought-provoking perspective in this video, positioning anxiety and laziness as two sides of the same coin.
There was an experiment that was done. It's been done in rats, but it's also essentially been done in humans through naturally occurring things where basically you can still experience pleasure without dopamine, but you won't get up off your couch. You won't challenge yourself to go talk to somebody you want to talk to. You won't apply for a job. You won't pursue the new, fitness protocol, etc. So dopamine is about craving of pleasure. It's not pleasure itself. And fear comes from this pathway, right? This pathway of dopamine into epinephrine. And the way to think about fear is it's just one other dimension of motivation. And we can talk more about that. But if people are living in fear, it is absolutely essential to understand that developing some sense of craving, even if it feels scary, wanting something but being afraid to pursue it, that's the trigger for these molecules to start being released and to move towards it. But we've all sort of been told or conditioned that if we feel fearful, that's a sign that we should back away or stand still.
This perspective suggests that our brain's instinctive reason to have that reaction of shying away from exertion fuels our anxiety. This revelation is empowering because it implies that we possess the power to quell our anxiety by challenging this deeply ingrained laziness. Understanding the complex interplay between laziness and anxiety signals the dawn of a new era in our journey towards improved mental health.
And biologically, that's just not true. So if people are feeling paralyzed in fear, or they are feeling as if they are unmotivated.
It was definitely clear. So I guess the question is, do you think that fear is the primary driver for people who are feeling lazy and unmotivated?
Andrew Huberman unveils a subtle yet very profound connection between anxiety and laziness in his very insightful video. Very, I keep using that word, huh? He suggests that our brain's natural inclination to evade strain nurtures anxiety. However, this revelation is not the end, but more of a beginning. By challenging our inherent laziness, we can commence a process that gradually alleviates our anxiety. This newfound knowledge forms the cornerstone of constructing a life that's not only more empowered, but also free from the crippling effects of anxiety.
I do. I mean, there are two sides to this. I mean, and you see this a lot in the kind of psychological discussion around motivation. It's wonderful to think about moving towards things purely from a place of love and joy, and we feel that and we experience that with a child or with a puppy, or when we hear suddenly, music that we love, we feel that these same molecules are liberated into our body and brain, and we feel that positive motivation. But I think and that's beautiful, and that's a wonderful dimension of life. But I think that it's a mistake to assume that that's how it's going to feel to pursue the everything. And the other side of this is that when there's fear, where you can also be quite motivated. I always enjoy it once I'm doing it regularly, but the first couple of weeks are painful. This little back thing, and then, all the stuff crops up. But basically, I'm doing it out of fear, right? I don't want to die of a heart attack. And if you look at the numbers, if you're not getting 150 minutes a week minimum of cardiovascular exercise, your probability of having a cardiovascular incident goes way up. And you can pretend it's not going to happen because of your genetics, or you can do all sorts of, mental gymnastics. But the reality is that everyone should be getting that minimum, including me. There's a lot of activity in these brain regions. And then we got our forebrain, our prefrontal cortex for the aficionados. And when we're in a thinking and calm and deliberate and rational manner, when we can control our body and our mind, it's called top-down processing. We're controlling ourselves. But there's a lot of friction with that limbic pathway. I promise I'll get to the practices soon. So when there's this friction, we can call it limbic friction for sake of discussion. You can't control all those impulses and all that anxiety or fatigue for too long. And in fact, as you get more tired, or if someone has frontal damage, if they have brain damage to the frontal lobes, what you find is they become more impulsive. When they feel like sleeping, they just sleep, even if it's socially inappropriate. When they feel like yelling or screaming or swearing, they just do that. And so there's two kinds of limbic friction. One is when we're too activated and we want to calm down, and we're trying to say, okay, calm down. Don't say the thing that you shouldn't say. Don't do the thing you shouldn't do. And then there's the other kind of limbic friction, which is the world is happening really fast and we feel buried, we're overwhelmed, and we need to get more activated.
We need more energy.
We need more energy. We need to be able to lean into life, and we're feeling overwhelmed.
What's that called?
Well, we should come up with a name now. So that would be
exhaustion stress,
or
overwhelm stress,
or overwhelm stress. Or now a lot of people start giving these names to things that sound almost like clinical syndromes. So the adrenals don't really burn out. What happens is people are so overactivated. They're in this alertness, hyper alert stress for so long that eventually they kind of crash into the over fatigue stress. Okay.
So one turns into the other one.
Right. So the first thing for anyone trying to navigate stress, and then we'll talk about trauma, is to understand in what kind of stress they're dealing with. Are you exhausted and having a hard time getting your energy up? Or is your energy too high and you're having a hard time getting your energy down? Because the solutions to those are often quite different. So on the previous time we met, we talked about a tool for calming the body very quickly, which is this double inhale, long exhale. Typically the inhales are done through the nose, the exhale through the mouth. So the physiological sigh, which was discovered by scientists in the 30s, and then Jack Feldman's group at UCLA has really identified the underlying brain circuits, and then my lab is now looking at this stuff in humans in a kind of more clinical setting. That double inhale, followed by an exhale, we know is the fastest real-time tool for taking one's state of alertness down.
The hyper alert stress.
Right. You're not going to crash into sleep, but you're going from you're not feeling good, you're too agitated, you want to calm down. And what's interesting about that tool is it speaks to a principle, which is it's very hard to control the mind with the mind. The nervous system includes the brain, but also all the connections to the body and back again. And so when you can't control your mind, you want to do something purely mechanical, like the physiological sigh. Because that, once you take control of the body in that way, then the mind starts to fall under the umbrella of this top-down control again. Top-down control is what children and puppies don't have. If we
impulsive.
I've got a 10-year-old bulldog. His name's Costello, and in certain people who have frontotemporal brain damage, they become very impulsive.
I don't know. You can probably tell me better as a neuroscientist, but what happens when someone has brain damage, especially in the frontal cortex? What happens to the brain?
Yeah, so when I say top-down control, there's literally a set of wires, we call them axons, from the prefrontal cortex that suppresses these impulsive behaviors in the limbic system. And when there's damage, it's essentially removing that brake. And, in adults, older adults especially, and in young children, if you ever go to a classroom, I guess now kids are home a lot, but in a typical kindergarten classroom, what you'll notice is that some of the kids can sit very still, and other kids are rocking back and forth and moving around a ton, and the teacher is constantly trying to
people.
I was one of those kids.
Me too.
Exactly. Trying to corral the children, and children mature at different rates. And what you're seeing there is the different maturation of their frontal cortex. When you see a child that's very deliberate and can really control their speech and their behavior, you're looking at a child that has a lot of top-down control. The frontal cortex is really engaged. That makes our internal world measure time differently. What happens under those conditions is you feel like the external world is moving very slowly. I think I might have mentioned this in our previous meeting, but when you're really stressed on the hyper alert side, it seems like the world is going very slowly. You're going to, just knowing that, and knowing that it's likely that you're going to feel impatient and if the world is moving much too slow. Sort of like if you're trying to get someplace on time and the person in front of you doesn't know where you're going. I was the guy not knowing where I was going this morning, and we can't see each other in cars. So you think, what is this person doing? Oh my goodness. And they're just looking for the right turn. So there's that. And then when we are fatigued, it seems like the world is going really fast. Okay? And so for people who are exhausted, everything feels overwhelming. Now, of course, the rate that things are actually moving in the world is the same. Set of wires that goes down to your diaphragm, this muscle in your abdomen that can move your lungs. And then as you blow off carbon dioxide, when you do that exhale, your brain starts to calm down, and then your mind, the top-down control of the cortex, can start taking control of the limbic system again. It's almost like you're losing control of the automobile and you're trying to steer, but really there's another lever that if you just pull it, then the steering wheel will stabilize for you. You know, getting better at sleeping is a whole set of practices. But sleep is a slow tool. It's not a real-time tool, because if you're feeling exhausted and you have to get up and have your day, deal with children, deal with work, deal with life, we can talk about how to get better at sleeping, but in real time, what you want to do is you want to bring more alertness into the system. Focus and alertness. The way to do that is to take advantage of a very well-established medical fact. All medical students learn this, all MDs know this, which is that there's a direct relationship between how you breathe and your heart rate. And so I'll give a little bit of the background and then I'll give the specific practice, just so that people understand where this is coming from. So when we inhale, it almost feels like everything's moving up. But actually what happens is our diaphragm moves down. Okay, so when we inhale, our diaphragm moves down. When that happens, our heart literally gets a little bit bigger. The volume of the heart gets a little bit bigger, which means that whatever blood in there is moving per unit time a little bit slower. And there's a set of neurons in the heart called the sinoatrial node that sends a signal to the brain and says, hey, blood flow is slowing down. And the brain sends a signal back to the heart and says, okay, let's speed up, and speeds up the heart rate. So the short, concise way to put it is when you inhale more vigorously or longer, you're speeding up your heart rate. But you don't want your heart rate to be like this. You want your heart rate to go through these fluctuations. Heart rate variability is good.
Why?
Because heart rate variability reflects the activation of what's typically called the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the brain's ability to slow down and calm the nervous system. So when your heart rate is going like this, it means that your heart rate is speeding up and then your brain is slowing it down. Your heart rate is speeding it up and your brain is slowing it down. And that's what's happening all day long as you're moving through things in a kind of calm, alert way. Or if you wake up in the morning and you're experiencing the other kind of stress, which is, the key is to do a few breaths, even while you're getting out of bed and preparing your morning coffee or water or whatever it is, and just start breathing in a way that's inhale emphasized. Which sounds weird, but basically what you're doing is you're speeding up your heart rate. At some point, usually within only 2 or 3 of those breaths, you're going to feel more alert, and then you can just go back to breathing normally.
So you don't have to do this for hours, you do this for a few moments or minutes. That's
right. And while I'm a fan of breath work as its own thing, because breath work can teach you how to operate these levers in your brain and body, so to speak, breath work is a dedicated practice that you do away from these stressful events. Whereas learning to control your heart rate and thereby your mind using your breathing. So it goes breathing, heart rate, mind. I'm trying to say that we all have these circuits, these levers in our body that we can pull and push, and people learn how to do this intuitively. Mechanism, if people can just understand a little bit about why the heart slows down when you exhale more than you inhale, or why the heart speeds up when you inhale more than you exhale.